Your name?
Morgan Jones. What's your story?
You said that you would turn on your radio every day at dawn, and you were not there!
You sure you're gonna be alright out there, young? This world, we're always alone. You can hide, but you can't run. I lose people, and then I lose myself.
Who did you lose?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yes, you do. You lose people, then you lose yourself. I saw the tape. I heard everything you said.
So to answer your question, it was my wife, my son, and my friends. That's who I lost. Before I lost myself.
Fear the Walking Dead was a gritty survival story centered around the Clark family and the various people they met along the way. However, that would all change on the 15th of April 2018 as the writers changed the course of the show forever, and this would result in grave circumstances. So let's delve into the episode that changed Fear the Walking Dead forever. In case any of you haven't picked up on the episode that we will be covering today, it's Season 4, Episode 1, titled What's Your Story? This episode aired directly after the Season 8 finale of the main show, so this meant it brought many fans from the main show to view Fear the Walking Dead, but we will explore the consequences of this decision later on. I'm first going to start with a quick summary of the storyline of this episode. The episode opens with one of the biggest highlights of the later seasons of Fear, and we are introduced to the character of John Dory, the gunslinging cowboy, and after killing a couple of walkers and speaking to himself, he then crosses paths with Morgan Jones. We then get a flashback to Rick, Carol and Jesus trying to get Morgan to move back into their respective communities. And the cameos from the characters of the main show are actually really cool, but Morgan eventually decides to leave, and he doesn't just end up leaving, he ends up running all the way from Atlanta to Texas. He travels halfway across the country, and we get this in a travel montage of Morgan leaving Atlanta. And this brings us back up to present day with Morgan and John, and Morgan is insistent on leaving, but John encourages him to stay the night, so they end up settling down and going to sleep. But when I say them, I just mean John, as Morgan just lies awake with his eyes open before leaving in the middle of the night. Whilst out looking for supplies, he comes across a tent, which seems too good to be true, and it is, because it turns out to be a trap, and he is instead abducted by Leyland and his crew. But just as things look to be going very bad for Morgan, his new friend John enters the fray and shoots the gun out of Leyland's hand. However, he also ends up getting captured by the crew as well. This is where we're introduced to the character of Althea, who drives a SWAT vehicle. Althea tells Morgan and John that she is a journalist and wants to get their stories on camera. The following morning, John tells Althea that he is on a mission to find his girlfriend Laura, and when Althea asks for Morgan's story, he refuses and decides to leave by himself. John catches up to him to give him a new pair of socks, but then they realise they're in an ambush and they are being held gunpoint by Leyland and his men. They are back and they're trying to steal Althea's SWAT vehicle. After a short tussle with Leyland and his men, Morgan and John come out on top. However, Morgan is left shot in the leg. During Morgan and John's fight with Leyland's men, Leyland and Althea are fighting over the keys to the SWAT vehicle. In their tussle, Leyland is bit by a rattlesnake and he is eventually surrounded and set upon by walkers. Althea uses a machine gun in the SWAT vehicle to shoot all the walkers as Morgan and John duck for cover. After Leyland and his men are dead, Morgan, John and Althea leave in the SWAT vehicle. Morgan asks to be pulled over and Morgan tells his story from Atlanta to Virginia and the communities he's come across. He even mentions to Althea about the Savior War, and Morgan eventually decides to leave despite John's protests due to Morgan's injured leg. Althea asks Morgan why and he replies, "I lose people and then I lose myself," which kind of explains why Morgan didn't go back to the communities in the flashbacks we saw at the start of the episode. After limping off, Morgan comes into contact with a couple of walkers and has a spot of bother, which is unlike Morgan. But anyway, John comes and saves him. Morgan then reluctantly agrees to go along with Althea and John until his leg heals. Along their way, the group stops their vehicle when they see a woman crawling on the ground. They approach the woman, and this turns out to be Alicia Clark. Morgan, John, Althea are then surrounded by our original group, and the episode ends with Althea saying, "So what the hell is your story?" Now, before I get into the changes this episode brought to the series, I would just like to say that as a standalone episode, this is a very solid episode and I really enjoyed it. And so did many other fans, even critics rated the episode 8.1 out of 10 on IMDb. But this episode shifted the focus away from the Clark family and the other protagonists and onto Morgan Jones, a fan favourite character from the main show. Now, obviously I think a crossover is cool, however I think that this meant Fear the Walking Dead became a ticking time bomb. Because after it was confirmed that Morgan would actually become the main character of this spin-off show, the show was destined to fail. I mean, Fear the Walking Dead had been running for 3 seasons under a different showrunner, Dave Erickson, and had carved out a very loyal fan base who loved the Clark family and the early apocalypse setting. However, after Scott Gimple took over, he wanted to turn Fear into the Morgan Jones show. Another reason this show aired directly after the season 8 finale was to get fans from the main show who were familiar with Morgan Jones to watch the spin-off show due to there being a familiar character, making it easier to integrate them in. But this completely set aside the already beloved characters that the show had spent 3 seasons following. This change of direction saw these characters take a more backseat role, which annoyed many of the season 1 fans. So the writers had annoyed many of the early season Fear the Walking Dead fans, but all was good. Critics loved season 4 and so did the new viewers. So everything was good, right? The novelty of Morgan Jones had started to run out, and although some bright sparks still remained in the show, like John Dory, the ratings still plummeted for season 5, and that all started with the decision to move Morgan into Fear the Walking Dead in episode 1 of season 4. They had pushed the previous main characters to the side, annoying many of the OG viewers, and then poor writing and uninspired storylines meant even the new viewers started to lose interest. Let's take a glaring example. The change of scenery and the characters the early seasons of Fear offered us was a totally fresh start in a totally different geographical location from the main show. The scenery was stunning, and being in Mexico posed many problems to the characters that we had never seen before, such as a language barrier and dealing with the cartel. But the decision to move Fear the Walking Dead to Texas meant we lost a lot of the beautiful, vibrant cinematic appearances that the early seasons had, and the writers changed it to this dark and gloomy style, which you're seeing in the footage behind me right now. Not only this, but the niche Fear the Walking Dead fitted in shifted starting from season 4 episode 1, as there was a distinct lack of teens and young adults within the main show. So seeing Nick, Alicia, as well as Chris and Ophelia take centre stage in the early seasons of Fear made the dynamics feel so different. But after shifting away from these characters, the cast became middle-aged, just like the main show, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I think the show just lost a lot of its uniqueness. It just started to feel like a version of the main show with characters we cared about less. So why did the show shift away from its original direction? Well, that was due to Scott Gimple firing Dave Erickson from the Fear showrunner and taking over, as he wanted to cross over the 2 shows. And if you want to hear more about this in detail, you can watch the video about Nick Clark's death killing Fear the Walking Dead on my channel. But essentially, Scott Gimple wanted to take Fear the Walking Dead into a new direction. And talking about Nick's death, that brings us nicely onto the beloved characters that no longer wanted to or had arguments about Scott Gimple being the new showrunner. For example, the actor who plays Nick Clark, called Frank Delane, didn't like the new direction of Fear the Walking Dead, so asked to be written out. And the controversy surrounding Kim Dickens, who plays Madison Clark, not liking her new role in the show, and also the revival of Troy Otto, just to name a few problems the show would have to deal with in the future. But essentially many of the OG characters had signed up for 7 seasons under Dave Erickson, with Nick Clark being the main character and Madison becoming the villain. However, this was suddenly changed to accommodate a Morgan Jones crossover, just to leech off some short-term success that the main show would give them, which would eventually be the show's downfall. In conclusion, Season 4 Episode 1, What's Your Story, was a catalyst for change in Fear the Walking Dead. And although the change helped the show for a couple of seasons, it ultimately caused the downfall of this once beloved spin-off show. And Season 4 Episode 1 proves that, as it pushes our main characters into the background, it changes the scenery, it changes the art style, and it made the show feel so similar to the main show with a quarter of the budget, which made it feel like a knockoff version. And just to clarify, I like this episode. episode, but it's the episode that changed Fear the Walking Dead forever, and it became the Morgan Jones show after this and tried to capitalise on bringing viewers from the main show over by adding characters that they already knew. And it discarded the highlights from the early seasons, such as Nick and Daniel Salazar, as they took a back seat, and even killing off Nick due to the change of direction in the show. But along with many other features, that's what started to kill Fear the Walking Dead. And it all stems from season 4, episode 1. But thank you so much for watching, and if you guys would like to become a member of my channel, you can now do so below, which include perks such as choosing what topics I make my videos on, joining an exclusive group chat, and early access to all my videos. But I can't thank you all enough for all the support you've been giving me recently. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.